So look, I'm no expert. Um, I'm no insider, like people have said, especially on X, which I thought was funny. Um, I'm none of that. But when I look at the raw facts of the NFL trade deadline, and we had 8 trades today, 8 on a trade deadline day, and that tied a record for the NFL. Trade deadline moves. Now, Sauce Gardner was a fantastic move for the Jets, and perhaps Indy too, but they gave him a lot to get him. Quinn Williams going to the Cowboys, don't really understand. But this is about the Detroit Lions. Because I felt a lot of people, especially on Facebook, especially on X, there or 97 ticket, wherever you get your content. And I feel like there's some content creators that were going into this doom and gloom scenario. Now let me just explain for you my perspective on it, okay? Like you are able to have your opinion of the trade deadline. You're totally welcome to that. And I'm not gonna your opinion is your opinion of what Brad Holmes was. It too cautious? Was it no move Brad? Is it the same as Scott Harris? I don't feel it's the same as Scott Harris because in the NFL you don't get many trades. 8 was the most today, and that was the most in NFL history. And the players that we expected to move, like Bradley Chubb, Jalen Waddle, guys from the Saints, Trey Hendrickson, none of them moved. Okay. Now, Jalen Phillips was one of those guys that was on Lions' radar, and he would have been nice to have. But I think he got scooped up a little before you started your trade deadline prep. And I think Roseman was already in discussions to get this guy, Jalen Phillips. And Draymond Jones would have been really, really good for the Detroit Lions. But let's just sit here and talk about this, okay? The reason Howie Roseman has to be aggressive in trades this year is because his defense is not that great. When you look at the Eagles defense, they're 18th. The Eagles defense is 18th in total yards, 17th in passing yards, 19th in rushing yards, 19th in points, and they're 26th in third down percentage. Okay. Now, if that's a stark contrast to the Detroit Lions, which if we compare the Detroit Lions defense to the Philadelphia Eagles defense, here's the difference. Detroit's ninth in total yards, 12th in passing yards, 10th in rushing yards, 13th in points, and 13th in third down percentage. Okay. So the onus was on Roseman to make the necessary adjustments at the trade deadline. He lost Josh Sweat, he lost Milton Williams to free agency, so he had to go make up for the players that he lost. And this early in the season, you saw, they weren't the same team. They're missing guys that they should have got. They brought Brandon Graham off the scrap heap off of retirement, but it doesn't really matter. You know, there's this false equivalency in the NFL that Howie Roseman is the only way to win a Super Bowl. You know, like Brett Veach doesn't matter. You know, Les Snead started it. Les Snead with all his trades started it. But let's not forget where they started. They started with their draft, and then they made these abundant trades when they knew that they didn't have the guys. Like they didn't have the Jalen Ramsey, so they went out and got him. They didn't have the Matthew Stafford, so they went out and got him. They didn't think much of Jared Goff, so they went out and got Stafford, and they paid a hefty price. But here's the deal: there's multiple ways to win a Super Bowl in the NFL. I think what a lot of people do is they fall into this trap that there's only one way to win a Super Bowl. And Howie Roseman, what he does, he's fantastic. Howie Roseman is one of the best general managers in football. But when you compare apple to apple to apple, there's so many ways to skin a cat in this game. Like there's so many ways to skin a cat in terms of the way you build your team. You know, would Howie Roseman trade for Saquon Barkley if he drafted a Jameer Gibbs? Probably not. Would he trade for a Kevin Byard if he drafted a guy like Kirby Joseph? Probably not. Would he draft? Would he trade for a guy like AJ Brown when he could have drafted like Amon-Ra St. Brown? Probably not. When you look at the way things work, okay? It's you when you look at the traits, it's their weaknesses. Now you look at the Detroit Lions and you go, okay, what's their weakness? You could say pass rush, but so far, Al-Quadin Muhammad and Hutchinson have been pretty good. Then you add a Lee McNeil in there, it looks pretty good. Corner secondary has been a pleasant surprise. And Terry Arnold's been his statistics are really showing out. And you haven't got DJ Reed back. And once you get DJ Reed back, that could really vault it into the distance. What I'm trying to say is because Howie Roseman trades for players does not mean that's the only way to do it. When you trade for a player, it's basically admitting that you didn't have the draft power to draft that guy. Like, let's put it in perspective. If Brad Holmes needed to trade for a guy like Saquon Barkley, he probably would. He probably would. He doesn't need to. He doesn't need to trade for a Kenneth Byard, a Keith Byard from Tennessee. Diaz Kirby Joseph. He doesn't need to trade for a guy like um, AJ Brown. He got it. And it's funny because all the time I hear trade deadlines and I hear Howie Roseman. AJ Brown was not a trade deadline acquisition. Okay. Saquon Barkley was not a trade deadline acquisition. Okay, that's how they made their team, and it was in the off season. Let's go by their trades over the last couple of years. Um, over the last couple of years, they got Kevin Byard, October 23rd from the Titans for Terrell Edmonds in a fifth and a sixth. Last year they acquired Robert Quinn from the Bears. In 2021, they acquired Kerry Vincent from the Broncos. He was a DB. I don't know who the hell he is. Eagles trade Joe Flacco to the Jets for conditionals. 2022, they traded Joe Flacco. They acquired Jannard Avery from the Browns in 2021. They acquired Golden Tate from the Lions in 2018. In 2017, they acquired Jay Ajayi, the running back. They acquired in 2013. They acquired defensive tackle Isaac Sapaga, and then Eagles trade Ronnie Brown to Lions that was voided after the physical. So when you look at his trade deadline acquisitions, including this year, okay, Howie Roseman has made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 since 2010. 11 since 2010. And in the first 4 years of his regime, he made 2 trades. And one was voided. And that was a Ronnie Brown trade to the Lions. And so, look, there's multiple ways to skin a cat. There's multiple ways to acquire talent. There's multiple ways to put yourself in the best seat to win a Super Bowl. If Howie Roseman, acquired players that everyone says, oh, AJ Brown, off season, Saquon Barkley, off season. So look, there's been trades where it has worked out in people's favor, but you don't in the NFL. You don't usually the trade deadline is kind of a made up synopsis. Like we all sit here and we're like, oh, the trade deadline is coming. The trade deadline is coming. Oh my god! I think the trade deadline in the NFL is totally made up. Because if you talk to people in the game, they said the trade deadline should be moved back to like after Thanksgiving. Okay, because you're not really getting the full spectrum of the league, and I kind of agree with that. But the trade deadline for the NFL is completely different from the trade deadline in the NHL, the trade deadline in Major League Baseball, the trade deadline in the NBA. The NFL is like, if you trade this player and his contract, it's hard to move money. It just is in the NFL. It's a weird optic league. And I think that they're going to probably do something in the next CBA. But all in all, like people were like clowning and people were talking crazy. Like I was on X and I was listening to people say like, oh, this is like the worst thing ever. Go do some research. What I implore people to do is do some research. Howie Roseman, okay? He only made 4 trades in his first 4 years in the offseason, okay? In the past couple years, he's made more trades than ever. Since 2017, he's made more trades than ever. He's been an aggressive GM, very aggressive, but that's what he does. Brett Veach is not aggressive, and he's won Super Bowls. Les Snead was obviously won a Super Bowl. Jason Light, the Buccaneers general manager, he won a Super Bowl, and he is not ultra aggressive when he could potentially be ultra aggressive. And all in all, like people were like, "Oh, let's go trade for an offensive lineman." The statistics are not in your favor. The statistics were not in your favor to trade for an offensive lineman. When you think about, there's been 8 offensive linemen, including Trevor Penning today, that have been traded since 2002. It just goes to show you, like there's not many players that are offensive linemen that are traded in season. In some way, the trade deadline, which isn't really a trade deadline because it's a fake media creation, in my opinion. Um, it is what it is, but you don't see many big trades anymore. We talked about it before. Would I like to see a Cam Jordan? Last year we were talking about Myles Garrett and Trey Hendrickson and Max Crosby. Neither one of them got moved. All 3 of them didn't get moved. You ended up getting Zadarius Smith. And when we look over Brad Holmes, trade deadline acquisitions, okay? Brad Holmes deadline acquisitions. 2022, you traded TJ Hawkinson. That when you traded him, it became Sam Laporta, it became Sam Laporta, Terrion Arnold, and Hendon Hooker. So Hendon Hooker was a total flop. They acquired Donovan Jones in 2023 for a 6th-round pick. That was minimal. And then last year they traded for Zadarius Smith. So it's kind of in the realm of what Howie Roseman does. In Holmes' first 4 years, he's made 3 trades. Roseman in his first 4 years made 4 trades. So it is what it is. If you like the video, subscribe below. We'll talk to you on the other side. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.